Welcome to the Clear-Sighted Career Online Learning Series, brought to you by the University of Notre Dame's Alumni Association. My name is Sharon Kane, and I serve as Director of Professional and Academic Programs. Thank you for joining us for this webinar titled, Finding Meaningful Work in an Automated World. Not long ago, it seemed that only routine tasks could be automated, but today we're living and working in a technological revolution. Computers conduct complex financial analyses, write articles, create art and movies, and even perform surgery. Our rapidly changing world can create automation anxiety, cause us to question what it means to be human, and wonder if any job is safe. According to a Gallup poll, 73% of Americans believe artificial intelligence will eliminate more jobs than it creates. How can we realize our full human potential if we're focused on keeping our job in hopes of riding out this revolution? Is meaningful work a luxury? How do we achieve it in this global environment? Research is revealing interesting insights into evolving job types, continuing importance of learning and developing skills, both of which are in our control. It's also revealing the importance of approaching our work as a calling, and pointing to humans as natural job crafters rather than job seekers. During this webinar, with the help of our Notre Dame expert, we will address these dynamics and take a realistic view of automation at work in our culture and marketplace. We'll look to better understand automation anxiety and its impact on our well-being, productivity, and performance. We'll discover practical strategies to navigate these complex questions and make work more meaningful for ourselves. I'm pleased to introduce our presenter on this topic. Please meet Brett Beasley, who's the Associate Director of the Notre Dame Deloitte Center for Ethical Leadership within our Mendoza College of Business. He is also a concurrent assistant teaching professor in the Management and Organization Department, where he teaches Mendoza's undergraduate business ethics course. Brett specializes in translating the best new ethics research into actionable insights leaders can use to prevent harm, promote fairness, protect human rights, and pursue the common good. Brett brings his clear thinking and educational training to his message that automation is not a cause for fear, but an opportunity to rediscover the purpose of our work. Brett, welcome to the Clear-Sighted Career Series, and thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm delighted to discuss this topic with you today. In my work at the Center for Ethical Leadership, I always keep one ear listening to the business community, paying attention to what are the most pressing and urgent concerns that are felt by leaders there, and then also one ear listening to what researchers are saying. And I'm always looking for ways to bring the two of those together to try to solve problems. And in the past couple of years, no problem has loomed as large as this one. What can leaders and individuals do about the future of work? How can we find meaningful work? How can we prepare ourselves for the changes that we know are coming? So I think first of all, it's helpful to begin with a few definitions. So automation is the use of technology to perform a task or process either wholly or partly independent of human oversight and intervention. And the technologies that are driving our current wave of automation are really specific technologies. So maybe you think first of robotics, but there's actually a lot of technologies underlying especially artificial intelligence that are driving these changes. And those are especially natural language processing and machine learning. So the ability that algorithms now have to improve over time and achieve better outcomes as they go. So when we combine all of these technologies together, we can actually form autonomous systems. So people are probably familiar with the example of autonomous vehicles. So that would be an example of a lot of new technologies coming together that can, at least in some cases, form a system that operates totally independently of human beings. So as we feel this anxiety about automation and what changes it might bring to our jobs, what is driving this underlying fear and concern that we have? I think for a lot of us, it's statistics. So perhaps you've seen this statistic that drove a lot of media attention a few years ago when it came out from Oxford University. So it said 47% of US jobs are at risk of being automated within the next 15 to 20 years. So that's a fairly shocking statistic, and although we should point out that that doesn't account for what new jobs might be created, it's still alarming to think about the rate of change and the amount of change that's going to occur as people learn the skills for new jobs and shift. And I think also for a lot of us, we recognize that this has been a long time coming. So I'd like to share this headline from a newspaper back in 1989. So even back in 1989, we knew that automation was threatening work. And moving forward in time, a lot of us have encountered the stories of huge technological disruptions that were driven by this new technology. So there's all kinds of examples we could point to, but I'd like to point to this one in particular, the story of Netflix. I'm sure one that we're all familiar with. So at one period in time, there was Blockbuster, and it employed 60,000 employees. And then along came a startup called Netflix that early on used the internet to just send physical discs to people, and it only had 30 employees. So you might say that Netflix is just the new Blockbuster, and in a sense it is. It has millions of customers, as we know, but it still only employs around 7,000 employees. So it's able to do a lot of work with much fewer people than a company like Blockbuster did, and that's due to these huge technological changes. And I think we're also all familiar with the particular way that companies and the media sometimes present technology in the form of these man versus machine contests. So people probably know this is Garry Kasparov, who was a chess champion and lost to an IBM machine called Deep Blue back in 1997. We're also familiar with examples like this one from 2011. Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter were, of course, defeated by Watson, another IBM machine. And I love what Ken Jennings wrote on his answer card. I think it's a clear example of automation anxiety, a really intense form. So he said, "I, for one, welcome our new computer overlords." So I think that's a feeling that we often have as we see technology achieve something that we never thought it would be able to do, something we thought was uniquely human. So moving forward in time, maybe people aren't as familiar with this example, but it's with the game called Go. So it's actually 300 times more complex than chess. And in 2016, the world Go champion was defeated, this time by a machine that was backed by Google. And that machine is called AlphaGo. And most recently, maybe people haven't heard of this one because the human actually won, at least is holding, humans have held their own so far in this area, their area of debate. So earlier this year, this machine, Project Debater, faced off against the world debate champion. And this machine is actually a descendant of Watson. So you can see from 2011 until 2019 how far technology has progressed. So Watson could answer Jeopardy questions and could get them right and form them in the form of a question. But this machine can actually debate. It can search thousands of articles and can form a logical argument. So another example of something that we thought and we like to think often is only the purview of human beings, but yet we see machines increasingly do and perform tasks that seem very, very similar. So what's the upshot of all this? Well, we know that a lot of white-collar jobs are at risk. So these jobs that are really knowledge-based work. So they're not just rote and routine tasks. They actually involve a lot of what we would think of as thinking. Machines are now able to do. So some of those examples are journalists, travel agents, bankers, insurance salespeople, even lawyers and doctors. So some of your standard professional jobs that would have seemed very safe a number of years ago. And even some more creative jobs, like artists. So last year at an auction at Christie's, a painting produced by artificial intelligence sold for over $400,000. And a lot of movie studios are now turning to artificial intelligence for what we would think of as creative decisions, decisions about who to cast and what kind of story to make into a movie. So that's no longer just the work of one creative professional. We're actually looking to artificial intelligence for those decisions too. So if we step back a minute from the anxiety that's created when we think about robots, artificial intelligence, and automation more generally as an adversary, we realize that this anxiety is really not a helpful way to develop the skills we need and to develop the mindsets we need in order to prepare ourselves for the future. And that's really because when we're experiencing anxiety, we tend to downshift, so to speak, into very self-protective behaviors and mindsets. And we're really not able to tap in to our creativity, our innovation, and our insight. And those are the things that we really need now more than ever to help us know how best to use technology to make human work more meaningful. So it makes us frame the problem really narrowly. We think about machines and automation as just an adversary, and we frame the problem as a battle between our jobs and the tasks that automation is now able to do. So what I'd like to do is offer a different set of strategies. So overall, think about it this way. We should not think about meaningful work as something that's nice to have in the future if we can. We should actually embrace meaningful work as the strategy for how to encounter these technologies and where we should use them and what types of skills we should develop. So meaningful work as the core strategy, not just as some kind of future outcome that we would like to have. So let me put a little bit of concreteness on that for you and show you a few strategies from the research about how you might be able to do this in your own life. So, number one, a mindset shift. First of all, think of your work as a calling. And if you take a moment now and think about your work and whether you do approach it as just a job or truly something that taps into what you really find meaningful and where you really see your purpose in life. For a lot of us, we don't get to that level of thinking about our work as connected to our sense of purpose. But research really reveals there's a couple different strategies for doing that. Amy Resniewski and Jane Dutton, two researchers, started to discover this when they observed the lives of hospital janitors. So a hospital janitor has a job maybe a lot of us wouldn't envy. So it's obviously a dirty job, cleaning up after spills and patients in a hospital. But they found that a lot of these hospital janitors actually loved their jobs. And they found that the hospital janitors were doing three things. They had some autonomy over which tasks they were going to choose to do and when they were going to do them. And they would shift toward the tasks that they found more meaningful. Some of these janitors that loved their jobs would also make their jobs more about people and more about the community and the connections that they were able to forge at work. So even though they had nothing in their job description that mentioned another human being, these janitors were going above and beyond. They would clean a patient's room twice, for example, if the patient or the patient's family didn't see them clean it. So they would go above and beyond to make sure that that person was cared for. And then that feeds into the third one, is that they changed what they thought their job was really about. So they weren't just janitors, they were hospital janitors. They felt connected to the overall mission and purpose of the hospital. So even though they had a relatively small role to play, they were still connected to that overall aim of making people well. So those are three strategies that are part of what's called job crafting. And it's become clear that humans are natural job crafters. This wasn't something that their manager had to tell them to do. These janitors would naturally do that themselves as long as they were empowered to do so. So those are three strategies you can use to start to approach your work more actively as a calling. And that will make you more agile and more able to know when you can find a task that could be automated and when you'd like to move toward a task that gives more meaning to what you do. Additionally, another reason that it's really crucial to focus on purpose, back in 2011, when Watson defeated Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter, the philosopher John Searle published this piece, which I'd highly recommend. And it just points out that Watson didn't know that it won at Jeopardy. This is something that's always going to separate us from any form of automation, is our sense of purpose that drives us. So Watson wasn't excited. Watson didn't have any kind of deep desire or underlying urge for achievement. It was just a machine that was processing a task and performing it as it was written to do. But for humans, we're driven by something much deeper. And we can't neglect that and leave that to the end. That has to be upfront and a crucial part of how we drive ourselves forward. So I love this quote by Studs Terkel, who spent years and years interviewing people about their work. He says, "Working is about the search for daily meaning as well as for daily bread, for recognition as well as cash, for astonishment rather than torpor. In short, for a sort of life rather than a Monday through Friday sort of dying." And I think for most of us, if we think about that, that's true, that we're really driven by this deeper impulse to participate in the world, to make a lasting contribution to culture and society. And we need to not lose sight of that larger sense of purpose. So one concrete way to do that is to focus on knowing your story. So you might hear a lot about personal branding, professional identity. Those are things that are threatened in some ways by the introduction of automation. Your profession might change a lot. Your skill set might change a lot. Those things might become really detached from the job that you do. But what you will always have is your sense of purpose, and that's really encapsulated really well in your story. So where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Those are crucial things to keep in mind going forward, and that will follow you better throughout your career than just a narrow brand or a narrow professional identity, over-identifying yourself with a particular type of job. So moving on to number 2. So number 1 was about a mindset shift, focusing on purpose and putting purpose first. 2 is really about a shift in skill set. So how do we embrace the kind of learning that we need? Well, it's first of all going to be continuous, ongoing learning. So something to keep in mind is you want to be a T-shaped person. Those are the people who are really going to thrive and excel in the future. So this is maybe a little bit counterintuitive to you. Maybe you think, I need to go out and specialize in whatever the newest technology is right now. But that actually can be a self-defeating kind of strategy, because as technology moves on, the thing that you just trained in will change, and there's a new specialization. And also, if we had a world of specialists only, they wouldn't be able to speak to each other. They wouldn't be able to see the connections between their different areas of specialty. So what we actually need is people who have a broad base of general knowledge, and they also have at least one deep skill set where they're a specialist. So a good principle to keep in mind is that as you go deep and specialize more and more in your one more narrow skill set, you also want to broaden out. And a couple ways that you can continue this process throughout your lifetime. So just as skills are going kind of deep and wide, they're going specialist and generalist, you're also going to be developing these skills throughout your lifetime. So one of the things you can do, you've already begun to participate in, because you're connected into a university program that goes beyond the 4 years or more that you might spend at university. So a lot of people, they won't leave their universities behind as they once did, and just maybe feel a sense of affection for them as they go throughout their lives. They'll actually stay much more connected. So this might come in the form of training that they need on demand as they take on some new task or new job. But it also might be that more broad knowledge. So they might be constantly checking in and learning something new just because they love learning and they want to be a broad, kind of T-shaped person. Another thing to look for as you embrace a kind of lifelong learning is some way for you to develop a portfolio of learning that goes with you. So as I said a minute ago, you may not be as tied into a specific professional identity throughout your life as your job and even your career changes multiple times. So you need a way to be able to communicate what you've learned throughout your entire lifetime, a kind of portfolio that goes with you. So there are a few platforms out there, and possibly your workplace might offer some version of this, is a kind of badging system. So the Mozilla Foundation has open badges, and there's other examples of a way of credentialing yourself beyond your 4-year degree about the continued education that you've gotten throughout your lifetime. So we have the mindset shift and the skill set shift. And then number 3 is to think outside the job. So just as we would say, think outside the box, we're going to need to think outside the job in the future. So jobs for many, many years now have been the main way that we bundle together work. We tend to think about work as being almost synonymous with a job, but that's changing. Jobs are becoming unbundled. Tasks are becoming unbundled from that job. So Deloitte, in the most recent human capital trends, talks about the shift toward super jobs, for example. So this would be an example of a position that actually incorporates the roles of multiple traditional jobs. And usually a person who's going to be doing a super job, they're going to be augmented in some way by technology. So they're not seeing technology as an adversary, and technology isn't completely eliminating a job. It's actually augmenting that person. They're working with it in order to do more than they once did, and perhaps do whole jobs that they would not have been capable of doing before. Another interesting way that companies and individuals are starting to look outside the job toward meaningful work is through the introduction of sabbaticals. So a really interesting example is this perk from Google. So they recognize that meaningful work is so valuable that they're actually willing to pay their employees to do meaningful work outside of their organization. So usually this is taking a technology they developed and using it in a nonprofit, maybe, in a developing country, to bring access to that technology to people who really need it, and it really impacts their lives. And what they found is that experience of meaningful work is so valuable, and employees come back so engaged that it keeps them from burning out, it makes them more creative, and it makes them more connected to what they do. And another example is just the introduction of unpaid sabbaticals, like this one that's mentioned in the New York Times, also from Google. So people are increasingly pressing pause if they need to in order to not burn out and to return with a regular cadence to these larger questions about meaning that are not wholly given just by the job that they might have at any given moment. So a few final thoughts to kind of wrap everything up. We don't know what the future of work is going to look like. I can't give you a blueprint of what it would look like, but we do know the kind of factors that are going to matter most. So 3 factors that are really going to be shaping the future of work. And those are first of all, the pace of innovation. So how fast do these technologies really get developed? And once they get developed, how do they get distributed? Do they get to market quickly? And then learning. We've already talked about skills. What's the pace of learning going to be? So that's a question that's going to be determined partly by governments, higher education institutions, and other educational institutions, and also individuals. And then third is the question of mobility and access. So who gets these technologies? Are they going to be in the hands of an elite few with other people left out? Or are they going to be broadly distributed where people have access to the technologies and the training they need in order to use them? So really a combination of those 3 factors will return vastly different scenarios that we can't fully predict, but that's what's going to matter most in determining what the future of work looks like. In addition, if you're looking for a few certainties about what's not really going to change, so from all the evidence that we have so far, we do know that certain skills and certain jobs are relatively safe from technology. So first of all, those that require a large amount of soft skills, what we call soft skills. So Things like empathy, problem solving, adaptability, creativity, persuasion, etc. Those are always going to be the kinds of skills and kinds of jobs that are harder to automate. In addition, a way to think about this also is the difference between high context and low context jobs. So that's not always the same as the difference between blue collar and white collar jobs. There are low context blue collar jobs and high context blue collar jobs, and the same is true with white collar jobs. So really the question there is, how many different factors do I need to know in order to make a decision? Does the task that I'm doing have clear inputs and clear outputs? And in the more complex those inputs and outputs get, the harder to define they are, the more difficult it's going to be to automate them. And then lastly, there is, especially in ethics, the components of transparency and explainability. So for a position or a job where you need to be able to offer a really clear and transparent explanation of the decisions you make, it's going to be very hard to automate that job. Because with artificial intelligence, we're not always going to be able to explain why artificial intelligence makes the decisions it does. We're not always going to have full transparency and accuracy with those decisions. So those are also going to be jobs that remain relatively safe from automation. So I think in sum, we see out in the world as we read newspaper articles and books and encounter media, we see a lot of tech optimism. People who think that the future is only brighter than the present and that each new development in technology is only going to benefit us. At the same time, we see a lot of pessimism, that each new advance in technology pulls something away from humans. It takes our job. It takes what we think is unique to us as human beings. But what I would like to suggest here is, I think, a hopeful approach to technology. So one that is realistic, but not overly optimistic. One that shows a way forward, but is still grounded in reality. So using these strategies, you really can find meaningful work, even through the uncertainties that are going to come in the future. I'd like to point you to a few resources going forward as you continue to dive deeper into these ongoing conversations. So the book Range, first of all, if you're interested in skills, and you're interested in especially those broad skills that are going to be crucial going forward. In addition, the spring 2019 edition of Mendoza Business Magazine, you'll find an article by me that is on this topic of automation anxiety, if you'd like to take a deeper dive into that. There's also an article about what higher education is doing and needs to do to prepare students for jobs that don't even exist yet. And there's also a great article about artificial intelligence and some people who are using artificial intelligence in ways that are explainable. So it will help orient you to that question as well. And then lastly, if you're looking for a really specific look at different industries and how they're likely to be affected by automation, I'd recommend this new book, The Robots Are Coming by Andres Oppenheimer. So it takes you through different industries and gauges what effects are likely to occur there. In addition to that, I'd encourage you to text ethics to 444-999, and that's a great way of subscribing to the Center for Ethical Leadership's newsletter. So every week we will do a roundup of the best new articles, and they'll often include articles about artificial intelligence, automation, and the future of work more generally. So I'd encourage you to sign up there and stay informed. And you can also visit our website where we produce briefings on the best new research that leaders can use to do everything that they do in a more positive and more ethical manner. So you can find that at ethicalleadership.nd.edu. Thank you.
Brett, thank you so much for distilling the research and giving us these practical strategies, because it's so, so helpful.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Brett, the struggle man versus machine and this often adversarial kind of default rather than ally is not a new struggle. And it doesn't sound like it's potentially going to go away, just given the human condition. So I'm wondering what advice you might offer of how we can counter this too often adversarial relationship with machines or technology?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. Yeah, I mean, we're at a point where about 200 years ago was the Luddite destruction of machines that I'm sure everybody is aware of. So I think at its worst that we can go that far. But I think what's really helpful is thinking about, and I like to be reminded that in some sense, machines can't work. You know, what we do when we work is deeply connected to developing ourselves. We have that deep desire to see what we're capable of, to refine what we do, to achieve a sense of mastery at it. We're very driven by that. We also want to make a lasting contribution to culture, to society. We want to have that sense of community. We want to kind of confirm our participation with other people in an organization. So we want to be part of something, you know, part of a collective. So those are the things that drive us. So I think it helps at least a little bit. Maybe it doesn't offer immediate solutions, but I do think it helps to recognize what's unique about us and to focus first of all on those things. And I think that helps counter this idea that, oh, I can be replaced, or the machine's going to take my job. Well, it won't really. I mean, it can do tasks, you know, and maybe it can perform some of the tasks that are part of your job, but it can never take that deeper sense of what it's all about.
Right.
So I think focusing on that helps a little bit to calm the anxiety, to help us start to make better decisions.
And you talked about being a T person and the role of soft skills in there. There's a phrase, you know, the soft skills are really the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to judgment, problem solving, innovation, empathy, these are truly human things. So to me, that is another source of encouragement. Yes,
absolutely. I mean, a lot of those jobs that are most safe, I think, they're all about our ability to connect with other people. And in some ways, that's the work that we really want to be doing when we get down to it. So I think that's good news anyway, that we create value together in a community, and a machine is never going to be able to do something like that.
Right. Mm-hmm. We know from research that the generations that are moving into the workforce, millennials, Gen Zers, that the number of career transitions they'll experience will probably be more numerous than the ones that you and I have experienced. And so they're often looking for, how do I navigate this? And it seems like you're going to need a number of things, but it all, based on what you said, that this wanting to find purpose is a core driver for human beings, that as you look to make these career changes, whether it's to a different organization, field, industry, et cetera, that finding organizations that are clear on their mission and where there's alignment between individual values and that mission is going to drive performance for the individuals and then through teams and in the collective.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yes. And you know, we're seeing that increasingly so. So even among younger generations, there's an even greater desire to have a job where you don't just wake up every day and do something you don't feel connected to. There's a real drive for a sense of purpose at work. And I think sometimes people make a mistake in attracting these younger workers because they imagine that maybe they want perks or they want to be somewhere that's fun or trendy in their workplace, but that's really not the case. They're really looking for a sense of purpose, as you mentioned. And it doesn't always have to be in some kind of grand way. So millennials, for example, feel a huge amount of responsibility for doing something to benefit the environment. But rather than donating a tremendous amount of money to an environmental nonprofit or something like that, although that might be good, a company, if they want to do something for those millennials that care about that and crave that sense of purpose, you know, they might do something with a local community garden or something like that. Something small, tangible, that people can really put their fingerprints on, that they'll really feel deeply connected to, then that kind of reinvigorates that sense of purpose. So sometimes, also I think companies are doing good and they just don't do a great job of showing that, of showing the people who,
sharing that
yeah.
out.
the people who are really benefited through the work that you do. So I think the example with Google is a good example. People are developing technologies that might be really improving people's lives around the world, but they don't, in their day-to-day work, see that. So getting them right on the front lines with that, they suddenly realize what it's all about.
Right. Well, again, Brett, thank you so much. We appreciate all you shared.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for today's webinar that's part of the Clear-Sighted Career Online Learning Series, brought to you by Notre Dame's Alumni Association. I also wanted to highlight just a few resources that are available to our Notre Dame graduates. First, we have Irish Compass, which is the address of irishcompass.nd.edu, and that is the university's official online community for networking, mentoring, and job board. There are also additional resources and services available at our website. Thank you.